Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, Strixhaven, A Curriculum of Chaos, comes out tomorrow, and I want to talk a little bit about the spells we're going to see in that book. Now, I have full access to the statistics of the spells, and that is thanks to the channel Fry Minis. If you have not checked out Fry Minis, this is a fantastic YouTube channel, and Eric has said he is looking to get 3,000 subs by the end of the year. I mean, he deserves so much more than that. So I'm going to be putting a link in the video description, and I'm just going to highly encourage any of the viewers of this channel to check out that channel. I think it is a very, very good D&D channel. Hey viewers, if you like this content and you would consider supporting it, then you can do so through Patreon. I have a link to my Patreon page in the video description if you want to check that out. My top level patrons can join me and play some D&D every month, and any patron of this channel gets to see these videos early and without YouTube ads. I'd like to say thank you to some top level patrons right now: David Edgar, David F., David Lotz, David Manning, David W. Skibbins, lots of Davids, Dewey Cheatham and Howe, DM Michael 7000, Douglas Reynolds, Ed Iverson, Eric Harvey, and Eric Wasserman. Thank you all so much for your support, and if your name is David and you're not a supporter, what the heck? Okay, let's get started. So there are 5 new spells going to be released in this book. Let's talk a little bit about how the classes do here. So Paladins and Rangers don't get access to any of these spells, so I guess they lose out here. Clerics, Druids, and Warlocks each get access to 1 of the spells. Artificer gets access to 2 of the spells, Bard to 3, Sorcerer to 4, and surprise, surprise, Wizards get all of the spells. Once again, Wizards win out. And they really do win out because there are 5 spells here, and there are a couple spells that are absolutely fantastic. And none of these spells are bad. I think all these spells are at least okay. So I'm going to go through the list, and I'm going to go from level 1 spells up. And we start with one of the strongest spells in this book, Silvery Barbs. I think no other spell is getting more attention than this spell. I think a lot of people think this is the clear standout. I'm not convinced of that, but I do think this spell is incredibly strong, and I'm giving it a blue rank, which is my highest rank. This is a first level enchantment spell, and it is available to bards, sorcerers, and wizards. The casting time is 1 reaction, which you take when a creature you can see within 60 feet of yourself succeeds on an attack roll, an ability check, or a saving throw. We have a range of 60 feet with only a verbal component, instantaneous duration. Okay, so the spell reads: you magically distract the triggering creature and turn its momentary uncertainty into encouragement for another creature. The triggering creature must re-roll the d20 and use the lower roll. You can then choose a different creature you can see within range, including yourself if you like. The chosen creature has advantage on the next attack roll, ability check, or saving throw it makes within 1 minute. And notice, this spell is not a concentration spell, so we're maintaining that duration without concentration. A creature can be empowered by only 1 use of this spell at a time. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the trigger. It says, when a creature you can see within 60 feet of yourself succeeds on an attack roll, an ability check, or saving throw. So if a creature, say, beats you on initiative, that's technically not a success. Initiative doesn't have successes or failures, so you wouldn't be able to use it on that. The obvious place where it could be used that's quite effective is if a creature succeeds on a saving throw against maybe a spell or other feature that somebody is trying to use on an enemy. This also could be used if a creature rolls a critical hit against an ally. And we're kind of getting a double effect here because we're not only making them re-roll that check, and I mean, let's say an enemy hits your ally with a critical hit. If you have them re-roll, they may still hit your ally, but the chance that they'll get a second critical hit is not high, usually 5% on a straight up roll. And if odds were they would fail a saving throw, and they succeed and you have them roll again, well then, odds still are that they will fail that saving throw. Now I just want to put for a comparison here, if we look at the Chronologist Wizard, they get Chronal Shift. Now, what this does is a second level feature, and Chronologist is considered one of the strongest subclasses in the game. This allows you to magically exert limited control over the flow of time around a creature. As a reaction, after you or a creature you can see within 30 feet of you makes an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you can force the creature to re-roll. You make this decision after you see whether the roll succeeds or fails. The target must use the result of the second roll. You can use this ability twice, and you regain it on a long rest. Chronal Shift does have the advantage that you can use it on an ally that fails a check, as well as an enemy that succeeds on a check. But we have less range, not a lot of uses, and there's not that roll-off effect where somebody else gets advantage on their next check. And that's a really strong feature. And that's why I figured it's worthy to look at that as a comparison, just to highlight how strong Silvery Barbs is. Is this worth a first level slot? Absolutely. The only problem with Silvery Barbs is you're going to be running out of first level slots really quick because you're going to want to use this a lot. I suggest rationing it. Look for those critical hits. Look for those super important saving throws, especially when a creature rolled incredibly well against a saving throw they likely weren't going to succeed against. Those are the kind of cases where I think this is worth a first level slot. Otherwise, you're just going to run out of your first level slots really, really quickly. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit before we move on is the wording here. The triggering creature must re-roll the d20 and use the lower roll. So if a creature was to have advantage, so let's say a creature had magic resistance, and then they made their saving throw, and you cast Silvery Barbs, according to the wording here, the triggering creature must re-roll the d20. So they get a d20 to roll, so now you've killed their advantage. This would also apply, of course, if a creature was making an attack roll with advantage. Cast Silvery Barbs, you kill the advantage. Now, one limitation, just to be aware of, is according to the trigger, you must be able to see the creature. So if you have something like a fog cloud up or something, you will not be able to use Silvery Barbs. Moving on to second level spells. Our first second level spell is called Borrowed Knowledge. This is a second level divination. I've given this a purple ranking. That's kind of my middle ranking. I think this spell is okay. I don't think it's great, but I think it'll be handy sometimes. Casting time, 1 action, range of self, components, verbal, somatic, material, and the material component has to be a book worth at least 25 gold pieces, not consumed by the spell. Duration is 1 hour. You draw on knowledge from spirits of the past. Choose one skill in which you lack proficiency. For the spell's duration, you have proficiency in the chosen skill. The spell ends early if you cast it again. This is available to bards, clerics, warlocks, and wizards. Now, the first big limitation I see on the spell is it has a range of self, meaning we can't give it to somebody else. And this is actually a really big limitation. So let's say we had need for a skill that, nobody in our party has. So maybe the DM calls for a nature check, and nobody in the party is skilled in nature. And we are playing a cleric, and we decide we're going to use borrowed knowledge to get the nature skill. Well, the nature skill is an intelligence-based skill. If we're playing a cleric, probably don't have a great intelligence, and this spell doesn't fix that. So it's not really going to make us an expert at anything. But then again, if our cleric maybe wasn't proficient in medicine, and then there was a need for a medicine check, well, borrowed knowledge would give us a pretty good advantage there. The other thing to note is there's scaling with level. At 3rd level, when we first get access to this, it's a +2 because that's our proficiency bonus, but eventually our proficiency bonus goes up to +6, so we're going to get that scaling with level as well. The obvious comparison, as far as I'm concerned, is the knowledge domain of clerics. The knowledge domain gets a channel divinity option called Knowledge of the Ages. Starting at 2nd level, you can use your channel divinity to tap into the divine well of knowledge. As an action, you choose one skill or tool. For 10 minutes, you have proficiency with the chosen skill or tool. So this is very similar. The duration is longer. We get 1 hour instead of 10 minutes. I've always had an issue with that 10-minute duration, so I'm glad to see an hour here. Now, this doesn't give you proficiency in tools, just in skills, but I do see that coming up once in a while. The other thing I want to bring up here is the Divination Wizard. If you are a 6th level Divination Wizard, you get Expert Divination. Beginning at 6th level, casting divination spells comes so easily to you that it expends only a fraction of your spellcasting efforts. When you cast a divination spell of 2nd level or higher using a spell slot, you regain 1 expended spell slot. The slot you regain must be of a level lower than the spell you cast, and it can't be higher than 5th level. This actually sounds better than it is, because the problem is that if we're looking at wizard spells of 2nd level or higher, there's not a lot of good divination options there. So the divination wizard has this incentive to cast these divination spells, but they don't have good choices. Borrowed Knowledge is a spell I could consider casting once in a while, so I do think for a divination wizard, it's something I might want to consider. But overall, not a fantastic spell, but it's okay. Our next 2nd level spell is called Kinetic Jaunt. It's a 2nd level transmutation spell. Casting time, 1 bonus action, range of self, components, somatic only. That's actually kind of interesting. Spells, for the most part, have verbal components, so just note that you could use this in a silent spell. Duration, concentration, up to 1 minute. So this is using our concentration. You magically empower your movement with dance-like steps, giving yourself the following benefits for the duration. Your walking speed increases by 10 feet, you don't provoke opportunity attacks, and you can move through the space of another creature, and it doesn't count as difficult terrain. If you end your turn in another creature's space, you're shunted to the last unoccupied space you occupied, and you take a d8 force damage. And this is available to artificers, bards, sorcerers, and wizards. I should talk a little bit about the third point. Normally when you move through spaces that other creatures are in, that is treated as difficult terrain, so this gets around that. But also, normally you can't bypass enemies that don't want you to, but this gets around that as well. So there's a little bit of mobility here that isn't really duplicated by anything short of a teleportation. But if we really think about the kind of things that teleportation can do, this is just scratching on the surface. So moving past enemies, yeah, that's helpful, but teleportation does a lot more than that. Even if you have to be able to see the area you're teleporting to. There's going through windows, going through spaces that are too small for you to get through, bypassing terrain that might be difficult to get through. Never mind escaping various effects that may have dropped your speed to 0, like being grappled or restrained, that kind of thing. In fact, if I look at this spell, the other spell that immediately comes to mind is Zephyr Strike. Now, Zephyr Strike is only available to Rangers, and this is not available to Rangers, so we are talking about different classes. But I think it's worthwhile to look at spells that do similar things. And in the case of Zephyr Strike, we are talking about a 1st level spell. This is a 2nd level spell, so I would expect this spell to be significantly better than Zephyr Strike. I'm not sure it is, to be honest. Now, Zephyr Strike is a pretty good spell. I don't think Zephyr Strike is fantastic, but I think it is solid. And when I look at this versus Zephyr Strike, well, you know what? Let's start by looking at the Zephyr Strike spell. So Zephyr Strike is a 1st level spell, concentration 1 minute. You move like the wind until the spell ends. Your movement doesn't provoke opportunity attacks. Once before the spell ends, you can give yourself advantage on 1 weapon attack on your turn. That attack deals an extra d8 force damage on a hit. Whether you hit or miss, your walking speed increases by 30 feet until the end of that turn, and that can be taken at any time during the duration of this spell. So there's a few ways where these spells are the same. First, they're both a bonus action to cast. Second, they both last for up to 1 minute using your concentration. Third, they both allow you to move without provoking opportunity attacks. Now, one way they're a little bit different is Kinetic Jaunt is giving you a plus 10 movement speed, while Zephyr Strike is giving you a 30-foot bonus to movement on 1 turn during the duration. So whether the 30-foot for 1 turn or 10 feet every turn is better, I think it kind of depends. Sometimes one's going to be better, sometimes the other's going to be better. I don't think one is inherently better than the other. So then the question is, which is better? Being able to move through squares of other creatures without it being treated as difficult terrain, and being able to move through enemy creatures, or the bonus to the attack, right? You get advantage and a d8 bonus to an attack roll. Now, I kind of think when we are talking about a mobility spell, I prefer the increased mobility. So I do think Kinetic Jaunt is the better spell. I don't think it's a lot better. And that's kind of the issue, because when I see a first level spell that does a similar thing to a second level spell, then that second level spell should be significantly better, and it's not. Now, again, these are available to different classes, so if I want to be able to do this, then it's the only option for these classes. But I also have to look at Misty Step, because Misty Step is available to a lot of these classes as well. Sorcerers and wizards, it's usually a go-to spell for me. And I look at Kinetic Jaunt, and if I have Misty Step, do I want to be using concentration for increased mobility when I can use the same bonus action and have the full effects of a teleport? Now, it doesn't have the duration, right? So we can't do it turn after turn unless we want to keep expending spell slots. But I do think most of the time Misty Step is going to be the better spell. All that together, I don't think this is a bad spell, but I just don't think it's a great spell. And I do think it is replicated by other effects, and I can look and find a first level spell that does a similar thing, and I don't think it's a lot better than that first level spell. Overall, I think it still qualifies as a purple spell, but I'm not super excited about this one. Next up is Vortex Warp. Second level conjuration spell. This spell has not gotten enough attention in my opinion. Everyone's talking about Silvery Barbs. More people should be talking about Vortex Warp. I think more people will be talking about Vortex Warp in the future, because this is a really powerful spell. Casting time 1 action, range 90 feet, components verbal and somatic, duration instantaneous. Again, this is a second level spell. You magically twist space around another creature you can see within range. The target must succeed on a Constitution saving throw. The target can choose to fail. Or the target is teleported to an unoccupied space of your choice that you can see within range. The chosen space must be on a surface or in a liquid that can support the target without the target having to squeeze. At higher levels, when you cast a spell using a spell slot of 3rd level or higher, the range of the spell increases by 30 feet for each slot above 2nd level. This spell is available to artificers, sorcerers, and wizards. Honestly, I cannot imagine, if this was available, making any of those classes and not taking Vortex Warp as one of my first 2nd level options. Now, I recently saw a discussion thread for these new spells, and Vortex Warp, I saw a comment where the poster said that they were disappointed by this spell, and the reason was because since you have to teleport the creature to a solid surface, that you couldn't cast it on an enemy, have them teleport up 90 feet, and then have them fall and take damage. And I think if that's, when you read this spell and you see that opportunity not there, that's like going into a room full of diamonds and going, well, there's no gold, let's move on. Vortex Warp is, generally speaking, not a spell I'd be casting on enemies. I might occasionally cast it on enemies, but generally not. In some ways, this spell reminds me of Levitate, in that Levitate is a spell that normally I will cast on an ally to get them out of danger. But we have the opportunity to cast it on an enemy if we want. They get a saving throw, so it's not necessarily usually our best option, but it is nice to have that option there. This one reminds me of that, except we're not using concentration. So Levitate is one comparison we could make, but I think actually a more apt comparison is the Thunderstep spell. Now, Thunderstep is a 3rd level spell, and if you've watched this channel, I often take Thunderstep when 3rd level spells become available, and I often will replace it with Dimension Door when that becomes available. But the reason we want Thunderstep, or the reason we want Dimension Door, is mainly to get allies out of danger, right? So you have an ally, and maybe they got chomped by a T-Rex, and now they're in its jaws, and they're about to be swallowed, and you move up to them, you cast Thunderstep, and what you can do is you can get them out of trouble. And that is what I see here, except I don't have to move anymore. The other thing is if you look at Thunderstep and Dimension Door, which is a 4th level spell, if you want to teleport an ally with those spells, which is the primary advantage of Thunderstep over something like Misty Step, then the problem is that we also have size limitations. Thunderstep and Dimension Door specifically have a limitation that you cannot teleport somebody who is a larger size than you. This causes a big problem if you're something like a halfling or a gnome or another small size caster. The other thing is if you have allies, especially now we have things like Rune Knights that become large quite often. And soon as they become large, we can no longer teleport them out of trouble. And something like Giant Smite for Rune Knight, they can't just turn off. It has a 1 minute duration and it just lasts. So we have this problem where if they get in trouble, we can't get them out anymore, even with those 3rd and 4th level spells that mainly have that advantage. Here we have a 2nd level spell and there's no size limitation. We don't have to move up with them. And compared to Thunderstep, our range is actually longer. I mean, Thunderstep has a 90-foot range, but here we could be 90 feet away from our ally, cast it on them, and then teleport them 90 feet the other direction. That's 180 feet of teleportation range. Now, I said this wouldn't normally be something I'd cast on enemies, but I appreciate the option to cast it on enemies because it gives it some versatility, and I think this is a great candidate for a twin spell on a sorcerer. So maybe we teleport our friend to safety, and what the heck, we'll give a try and see if we can teleport an enemy. And generally what you want to do with that is, like if you teleport an enemy 90 feet away and they don't have range attacks, well, you've probably just stolen at least a turn from them. Never mind being able to teleport them to places where maybe they can't even get to you. There could be a cliff 90 feet down and you teleport them to the bottom of it. Or a flying creature. You cast Vortex Warp and teleport them down to the ground where they can be grappled by the rest of the party. The tactical applications of this spell, I can see several very common, very useful uses for Vortex Warp, and I'm betting that I'm going to be surprised with more in the future. This spell, I think, is the standout spell of this entire book. I am super impressed with this. And like I said, if it was available to my sorcerer wizard, I'm taking it 100%. The last spell to talk about is Wither and Bloom. This is a 2nd level necromancy spell. Now, when I first heard the description of this spell, I was not a fan. I've looked at it more and, I've warmed to it to some degree. I still don't think it's a great spell, but I think it's okay. Casting time 1 action, range 60 feet, components verbal, somatic, and material, instantaneous duration. And it reads, you invoke both death and life upon a 10-foot radius sphere centered on a point within range. Each creature of your choice in that area must make a Constitution saving throw, taking 2d6 necrotic damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. Non-magical vegetation in that area withers. In addition, one creature of your choice in that area can spend and roll one of its unspent hit dice and regain a number of hit points equal to the roll plus your spellcasting ability modifier. And then at higher levels, when you cast a spell using a spell slot of 3rd level or higher, the damage increases by 1d6 for each slot level above 2nd, and the number of hit dice that can be spent and added to the healing roll increases by 1 for each slot above 2nd level. First thing to note here is the damage here is bad. 2d6 necrotic damage and half on a successful saving throw. 2d6 damage, that's 7 on average, so 7 average on a failed save, 3 on a successful save, and this is a 2nd level spell. For comparison, the Shatter spell, also a 2nd level spell, same range, 3d8 damage, so that's a lot more damage. And frankly, Thunder is more reliable than Necrotic, though Necrotic is reasonably reliable, and the same area. So why would we ever want to cast this? Well, there's 2 reasons. The first is that with this spell, unlike Shatter, we don't have to worry about friendly fire. So we hit the enemies, we don't hit our allies. The second thing is we can choose one ally and they can expand a hit die. And if they do so, they will recover hit points equal to the roll of the hit die plus our spellcasting ability modifier. Now, the way I read this, normally when you take a short rest and you expend a hit die, you roll your hit die and you add your Constitution modifier. Here, I don't think you add your Constitution modifier. I think you add the spellcasting ability modifier of the caster instead of the Constitution, not in addition to it. So this isn't a huge amount of healing. But I will note that if I look at the classes that get this, things like sorcerers and wizards just don't get a lot of healing options. In fact, in combat healing options, they basically get very, very little, unless you're considering something like polymorph to be healing, which I think arguably it is. But here we have a second level spell where we can actually restore hit points to an ally. But if we're third level and our ally is expending hit dice, that's hit dice they're not expending during a short rest. So we are kind of limiting what we can achieve with short rests if they're expending their hit dice outside of combat. Second thing is, this is only one ally. We're not choosing, if we could choose every ally in the area and they could all expend a hit die, I think this would actually be a decent spell, because then, you might even cast it outside of combat to just in place of a short rest to get everyone a little bit of hit dice recovery. But that isn't really going to be an option here either. But there is a little bit of healing, and I do think that's noteworthy. And we're avoiding our allies in the area of effect, and I do think that's noteworthy. But the damage here is so bad, and that's kind of the main thing. The healing here is pretty small, and so you combine them, and then is this okay when you add them together? Yeah, I think it's okay, but it is bad damage, bad healing. Added together is still bad damage and bad healing, but at least it's two things instead of one thing. So overall, I think, this is passable. I don't think this is a great spell, but you know what? If you're playing a sorcerer or wizard and you're looking for a way that in combat you can restore hit points to allies, well, this does do that. Overall, I'm giving this spell a purple ranking. I don't think it is a particularly strong purple, but, sorcerer wizard, I could see taking this spell and getting, okay value out of it. And that's all the spells that will be coming out in Strixhaven. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of these spells, or if there's any gems here that you think I didn't give proper value to, or do you think I'm overvaluing any of these spells? But for me, that's all I have to say on these for now. Until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.